So many of my clients get anywhere between 10 to about 20 inbound jobs per month, whether that spans dental, restoration, pest control, so on and so forth. So in this video today, I'm going to go over how I get my clients anywhere between 10 to 30 inbound jobs per month, so you can just copy me. And before we get into it, just a quick introduction. My name is Matthew Johnson, and I've been a founder of Pleiades Consultancy for the last 4 years, where I've created and scaled my own marketing agency to multiple six figures, and then proceeded to serve as a CMO of an Amazon agency, where we worked with some of the largest names in the e-commerce industry, many of which you probably know, like Ridge Wallet, Hexclad, BK Beauty, so on and so forth. During my tenure there, I tripled the company's client base from 15 to about 45, but that doesn't include like one-off deals or opportunities that were generated outside of the business, and of course ones that churn. So that number is probably upwards of 50 or so. But anyways, going into it now, I currently work with many local businesses spanning anywhere from carpet cleaning to restoration to dental to accounting to law, and so on and so forth. I can go on and on about this. But what I want to go over is exactly how we're able to generate these types of results for clients, get them listed onto ChatGPT, where you can see here, my client has gotten a couple deals from ChatGPT, as well as, of course, through Google search, and how they went from zero to generating more than they were before. And this is all without any ad spend as well. So yeah, let's get into it. My client is Mr. Fresh Carpet Care. They're a carpet cleaning company based out of Fairfield, California. And as you know, with most markets in California, they're highly competitive. And he had a Google business profile that was basically starting from zero. He even had a duplicate listing onto that fact. So he was actively being hindered by maybe something that he tried to do in the past. So the first thing that we actually got started for them is their Google business profile was unverified. So that was the very first thing. We took care of the video verification and, coached him through it. We got the business profile verified, and then we were off to the races then. But before I go even further into it, I want to add a bit of a caveat. Carpet cleaning is not the only thing that my client does, and wasn't the reason he came to me in the first place. The reason was water damage restoration. If many of you don't understand or haven't had any experience in water damage restoration or restoration as a whole, water damage restoration, odor abatement, etc., are these services that you have to be IICRC certified for, and they typically result in higher tier and higher quality jobs, depending on, of course, where in the US you are in your area. So, for example, in California, where people or these places, most of it, are susceptible to wildfires, fire damage restoration is a hugely competitive niche where people can go in, take care of the damages, and help with full restoration. So these are higher ticket jobs, higher tier jobs, and they can span from anywhere between 2,000 to upwards of 15, 20, 30K. So the importance of these jobs and actually ranking for them and getting them is, needless to say, it's something that people like, right? So just that as a background, let's get into it. So as I said in my previous video, which if you haven't watched, feel free to check that out. I break down a dental clinic that I did this for, who achieved over 400 calls since working with us. But anyway, the first thing that we want to do is do a full audit on how they're ranking on Google as well as AI. I like to say that it isn't necessarily a two-way street. You can be doing everything right on Google, but still you won't be necessarily cited by ChatGPT or other AI platforms or models. Whereas if you are optimizing for AI, so ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, etc., if you're doing everything right there, then typically you're going to already be doing well on Google by default, because many of what actually ranks you on ChatGPT starts foundationally at the local level, right? So yeah, going into that, what we found was, of course, the Google business profile wasn't even verified. So that would already tell you how they were doing on Google and how they were doing on ChatGPT, basically invisible on both fronts. What the client did have going for them was that they've been around for well over 10 years, 12 years, since 2013. So they already at least had the experience under their belt. They've been on Yelp. They've been getting jobs consistently on Yelp, as you could have seen in that screenshot prior. And they are IICRC certified. So we had many of the building blocks. What we lacked really was more of the foundational stuff, like a verified business profile, like a website that actually converts and is technically optimized. But we'll get into that as the video progresses. So once we determined all of the issues that came with the profile, we needed to first ensure that the primary category of the Google Business Profile was correct, which is, again, the foundational piece. The Google Business Profile, we theorize, or based off of data, can span from anywhere between 70 to about 80% of the rankings on stuff like AI, right? Especially Gemini, for example, which is Google affiliated. So we always start from the Google Business Profile first. And when starting with the Google Business Profile, you have to ensure that the primary category is correct. If the primary category is incorrect, then nothing else matters. Like you will be cooked, so to say, for lack of a better word. So of course, the obvious decision was carpet cleaning service as the primary category. And as an additional category, as I mentioned prior, my client does water damage restoration, janitorial services, and upholstery cleaning services, which would all be suitable for additional categories. As a quick tip, if you want to understand what your category should be, you can just look at whoever is ranking top 3 within your area for the service that you want. So if you see that the top 3 all have carpet cleaning service as their primary category, then needless to say, your primary category should be the same. It should coincide. You'd also notice here that carpet cleaning has higher volume. They're steady all year round, as opposed to restoration, which I like to call seasonal services, or is a seasonal service. And the door to restoration work walks in through something like carpet cleaning, where you're able to discover all of these. Let's say that there's water damage somewhere, or there is mold somewhere, and then you can point that out to the client and then upsell from there. Restoration is highly competitive and it's seasonal. So you'll find that many of these restoration companies, especially if they specialize only in restoration, you'll find that many of them experience the highest demand during, for example, hurricane season, if they're near to the southeast, right? Like if you're somewhere in Florida, for example, or during wildfire season in places like California. Unless they do something like biohazard removal, which also serves or is also categorized under restoration, then it's a seasonal service and it's really feast or famine and everybody's fighting for those scraps. So I'm not necessarily a fan of seasonal services like this, especially for something like SEO, but it definitely works. I have multiple clients in the restoration niche that we work for based out of Utah, for example, but that's talk for another video. Moving on. Next, we go to our services. So you'll find that I spoke about this in my last video, but you have Google listed services and you have custom listed services. These are incredibly important because they're used later on in our general SEO for landing page as well. And you should map these services to the categories that we outlined before. So clean area rug, clean carpet, clean upholstery should all be mapped under carpet cleaning service. Whereas something like emergency restoration services, water damage response, so on and so forth, emergency water extraction should all be mapped under water damage restoration, which is my subcategory. This will make more sense when you do it yourself, but you'll see that once you're adding a custom listed service, it's going to ask you, or it's going to prompt you to assign it to a particular category. And that's when you go in and make sure that they're under the right one. Because you don't want to put, for example, clean area rug, you don't want to categorize it under water damage restoration. That doesn't really make any sense, right? So you need to ensure that these Google listed services and custom listed services are properly mapped out. You can use a tool called GMB Everywhere in order to get this as well. No affiliate or anything, it's just a very helpful tool. You can use it in order to find out what your top competitors are doing for their listed services and custom listed services, and basically just copy it. You can't go wrong there. Moving on to step 4. So next, we have to make sure that we're tracking both halves, right? So you need to, for example, don't want to repeat myself, but if you don't know how you're ranking, if I don't know how I'm ranking in terms of carpet cleaning, upholstery, pet stain removal, then chances are, or other services, chances are I don't know whether or not my strategy is working. And as a result, it can greatly hinder my strategy and waste a lot of time, right? Which is, of course, something that we don't want to do. Moving on here to step 5. So citations that count. So for citations, we need to make sure that you're not only being listed on your Google business profile or on Google, but also a variety of other citations, which when I say citations, they're basically just third-party trusted websites or aggregators like the Yelp, like Apple Business Connect, like Bing Places, like the Foursquare, Uber, so on and so forth. We have an entire list of them, but for the sake of this video, I'll just go over the primary ones, right? You need to make sure that you're on these platforms because think about it. AI is trying to identify why they should trust you as a business as opposed to someone else. And it's always looking and parsing the internet for reasons as to why this should be the case. So it makes sense that the more credible places, sites that you're on, the higher the likelihood that AI will, of course, recommend you. So you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket just being on Google, but have a Yelp profile, have an Apple Business Connect profile, which also gives you access to Apple Maps and Siri through voice recognition. If you're not on this platform, then someone who uses Apple Maps or Siri will never be able to identify you, by the way, which is why it's very important. Or if you're on Bing, which you can just import the Google Business profile directly to Bing, saves you all of the trouble. Foursquare, being one of the largest aggregators of this type of data, is used in direct conjunction with ChatGPT, which of course leads to heightened credibility. ChatGPT pulls from Foursquare as well, so you need to be there. And all of these are free, by the way. And of course, you know Uber. So once you start getting listed on these sites, be sure to check that there's the same name, same address, and the same phone number on every single one. So, for example, for my client, the name is Mr. Fresh Carpet Care, right? As you can see here. But if this name on Yelp is Mr. Fresh Carpet Care LLC, there'll be an issue. And basically, Google is going to, and ChatGPT is going to identify it as being two different businesses. Because there are only so many business names that are out there. And if you aren't explicitly clear that it's the same business, then they're basically going to say, okay, well, this is an entirely different business, right? Mr. Fresh Carpet Care LLC versus Mr. Fresh Carpet Care. You know, it could be someone else entirely. So if these things aren't the same, the locations aren't the same in terms of the address, and this pertinent information of NAP isn't the same, you're going to find that you're going to be identified as a completely different business, and those rankings could potentially be going to somewhere else. So I perform audits for my clients across all of their citations, especially if they've already set them up prior to meeting me and working with me, because many of them have already worked with an SEO agency in the past. I'm sure you don't need to hear that spiel, but we do the whole audit, make sure that all of them are congruent with each other and stays that way for the foreseeable future, which of course helps in boosting their rankings, right? Now, once we've gotten all the Google Business Profile stuff out of the way, we move on to the website. So the client before had a website that was built in 2013, and it wasn't even built on WordPress. It was something that he had done with his partner because it's more of a family business. And while it was better than nothing, it wasn't doing him justice in terms of properly showcasing the type of skill that he has with his service and the track record that accompanies it. So we did an entire website build out or rebuild for him and hosted it and everything ourselves so that clients would be able to see the congruence between the quality of jobs that he does with the business and what the website actually shows, right? Now they align. So we did for the website an H1 that's relevant to the services that he's trying to rank for. So the H1 is basically the first thing that is read on the website by these algorithms, by these robots.txt files, which are just bots that read the site. So carpet cleaning and water damage restoration in Fairfield, California. The significance of this is it's highlighted with keywords and with the area that we're in and are trying to rank for. Because as I mentioned in my previous video, go check that out once again if you haven't seen it. We are doing this within a 10 to 15 mile radius of the location of the business. Because outside of that radius, ranking becomes significantly more difficult just because Google doesn't see the point in showing you to someone that's 20 miles away when there's another company within a 5-mile radius of that person that could just do the same job. Right? That's how you need to think of it. Regardless of how big your company is, it's going to get more difficult once you leave that 15-mile radius. But moving on, we've also done a complete build out of their service pages and service area pages. So we typically do between 5 to 10 of these pages just because we found that that's the sweet spot. But the more competitive the niche and the wider you want to cast the net in terms of radius for where you want to be ranking, the more of these pages that you would want. So American Canyon, Benicia, Concord, Cordelia, Dixon, Fairfield, so on and so forth are all areas that my client services. And by having them on the website, we're signaling to Google and ChatGPT that these are potentially who the type of clientele and the type of prospects that we want to show our product to. So incredibly important. One thing that I see many pages don't do that is significant as well is ensuring that the Google business profile is properly embedded on the site. Excuse my drawing. So what do I mean by that? You have a Google embed for your Google business profile that you can drop onto the site. And it basically tells Google and as well as ChatGPT that these two are the same business. So going back to it, remember we were talking about NAP and how if even one thing is off, it sees it as two different businesses. We're basically sending the signal through this embed that like, hey, Google, hey, ChatGPT, hey, Gemini, this website belongs to this business and all of its elements that we're trying to rank for are one in the same, right? So here you can even, leave a review, get directions, so on and so forth. And we make sure to have this on our contact page, on our homepage, and we also put them on our service area pages just to continue sending that signal. So as I said, very important. And I don't see many people do that. Like if you have a web dev, make sure that they do that. So what we found, and going back into more of the GBP stuff, because once we've gotten over the foundational stuff and then the website related stuff, so technical SEO, so on and off page, we move into the review strategy. Now, my client has already done incredible work and he has scores of reviews on Yelp, but because he neglected his Google business profile, just because he didn't know the significance of it, none of those or many of those reviews didn't translate to Google. So we were basically starting from scratch. If memory serves me correctly, we started at 11 reviews and slowly built up to 23. And we're already outranking carpet cleaners that have hundreds, right, within the same area. Just because the significance of the reviews, as I mentioned in my last video, there's a difference between an unoptimized review and an optimized review. An unoptimized review says things only like, and I'll probably drop an example of one up here, but it says stuff like, hey, he did a great service, would 10 out of 10 recommend. versus an optimized review says something like, Mr. Fresh Carpet Care did an excellent job on my water damage and carpet cleaning job. I would highly recommend him to anyone within the Fairfield area, and he did an excellent job, right? The difference between those two is the amount of keywords that are in them in the optimized review versus the unoptimized review, and the signals that you're sending back to these profiles, to these algorithms. Because in the review that's optimized, you say your company name, you said, or they said the location, which is Fairfield, and also the type of job that was done, which are critical to the importance of the information that are sent back to Google and these other algorithms. So just by getting around 12 of these optimized reviews since the very beginning, again, we've already been outranking profiles that have significantly more reviews and even, as you would say, better track record, right? Very important. Now, this is something that I see many people kind of get up in arms about, which is backlinks. Now, for local, I always like to start off with just, if I could only build one backlink for my client site, regardless of where they are in the US, it would be a Chamber of Commerce link. Because the Chamber of Commerce link has a very high DR, which means domain reputation, because it's a government affiliated institution. And I mean, typically it doesn't really get much better than the government, right? In terms of reputation, they're the ones that you should be able to trust. So if you need to build a backlink as a local service business and you could only choose one, I would go strictly for the Chamber of Commerce listing. Now, there are some other ones that you can do that are great, maybe not as good as the Chamber of Commerce, but they also serve to increase your reputation, is the youth sports sponsorship. Like, you can just sponsor a local team if it's softball, if it's flag football, if it's a swim team, it doesn't matter. And then local charity or non-profit events. Because you can't go wrong with giving back to your community, especially the one that you're trying to rank in. As opposed to, building a random backlink at, like press releases are good, but typically I prefer these high DR links, especially for local. Now, something that I don't see very many people do, and they always have, they either have the issue or they never have the issue just because they don't care about attribution. So why can I confidently tell you that my client is receiving these leads from AI and that this isn't Fugazi? Is we do attribution through lead forms on the website because there are just some people that prefer to do this as opposed to call. They will submit exactly the type of service that they want, where they come from, and then any additional details. And then an email is sent directly to my client because I basically take that information, it's hosted by me, take that information and then send it directly to my client immediately as soon as it comes through, because speed to lead is important. And my client gets up, calls them back, and they have a significantly higher booking rate because of this type of flow. Not only that, but we've administered tracking or attached tracking and attribution through Google Analytics, as well as Google Tag Manager, in order to determine exactly where the lead comes from, even the browser that the lead comes from, so that the client never has to worry or guess whether or not this is something that works. They just are able to tell based off of the data alone. And even if you say like, hey, maybe this isn't 100% true, he also just asks the client that where did you find me? Where did you come through for? And that typically validates exactly what we're doing. So I would highly recommend this. Apart from those with emergency services. So this carpet cleaning isn't really an emergency service, but something like water damage restoration is, emergency plumbers. Like, people aren't going to jump onto your website and then fill out a form if there's a plumbing emergency. They'll typically call you, which is why we track calls directly made to the number as well, which I showed you earlier. So as you can see, most of the inquiries still came from Yelp, which my client was already on, but he went from only seeing jobs through Yelp ever so often to receiving jobs through ChatGPT, Google search, and then, of course, his referrals found his website once again and went from there. Because some people can just lose the number. They really love the service, but they've just lost the number, or there wasn't like a card left behind or something like that. And they found him via the website again. So my client received his first AI lead in under 30 days. And I like to set the expectation with clients that it can take anywhere between about 60 to 90 days. So that's 2 to 3 months before you really see things coming in. But there are cases like this, often cases like this, where clients will see results within less than 30 days just by making these tweaks, even if the client is basically starting from scratch. Because Rome wasn't built in a day. That's what I like to say. It's an age-old term, an age-old adage, you could say. And it holds true, especially for something like SEO, where you're not spending money in ads, but the organic presence that you build only gets better with time. So yeah, there was just one that wasn't even a carpet cleaning deal that came for mold and odor abatement, which is a form of restoration, which again shows you that it's important to have your services listed as well as those categories correctly chosen. So yeah. However, what this doesn't prove, because I know somebody's in the comments will say something like, hey, 10 isn't that big of a number, or, Yelp is still the biggest single source. Self-reported means it's imperfect, or, this isn't a replacement to ads. I'm not insinuating that this is a perfect replacement to ads or that 10 is some grand number, but think of it like this. You're a business that is still relatively small and your marketing budget is incredibly low. However, now you're getting leads consistently through a channel that you don't have to spend ads on, and you're slowly building your budget and building your client base, which you can then invest more into other forms of marketing. Because those deals or those jobs that he's done through carpet cleaning will lead to referrals, and those referrals would lead to more referrals, and it's a snowball effect. So this is all that I wanted to show in terms of the results that I've gotten for this client, and we're still working with them. Our rate of retention is very high for a reason. And if you want our 7 free trainings where we go over every single step of this in explicit detail, it's somewhere north of 400 pages in total. You can get the document listed down below. Or if you'd like me to just do this for you, yeah, completely done for you. We take care of everything listed here and more. In terms of we do blog strategy, etc. Then again, feel free to grab a time below. Let's chat. At the very least, you'll leave with a complete audit of what exactly you'd be able to do to see very good results today. But yeah, that's going to be it for the video. Like, subscribe, do all of those great things, and check out one of these videos on the screen and watch next on how exactly I would take a business from 0 to 100K, a local service-based business, within anywhere between 60 to 90 days using a similar strategy. All right, see you in the next one.